Here we go. Hello and welcome to Smart Kids with Learning Disabilities virtual presentation. The name of this presentation is Anxiety and Trauma: How to Help Kids Cope with the Effects of the Pandemic with Dr. Chris Bogart. First, a little bit about us. Smart Kids with Learning Disabilities mission is to help children with learning and attention differences reach their full potential by inspiring, educating, and empowering parents to help their children succeed. Now, I realize that some of you will have questions for Dr. Bogart while he gives his presentations. If you could please write your questions in the chat side, and I will ask him the questions during the presentation. Also, for best viewing, up in the top right corner, if you could pick the option of speaker, this way you will have his handsome face the entire time. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be a short poll, and I will be asking guests to answer a few questions to help us with future presentations. So now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenter. We are honored tonight to have our speaker, Dr. Chris Bogart. He is a licensed clinical psychologist who works with children, adolescents, and parents. He is the co-founder and co-executive director of the Sasko River Center, a multidisciplinary center in Darien, Wilton, and Stamford, Connecticut. This center conducts comprehensive psychoeducational and ADHD evaluations, as well as therapy. He also serves as the president of the board for Smart Kids with Learning Disabilities. So please welcome Dr. Chris Bogart, and we're honored to have you here. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Lois, and thank you so much for organizing me for tonight. Lois was an amazing behind-the-scenes person putting all of this together, so thank you for everything that you did. And I would say it's great to see everybody, but it's I'm sort of going on faith that all you guys are seeing me out there in Zoom land. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I really look forward to the day when we are all back in person and able to have these kinds of conversations together. And I don't think that's too far away. I look forward to those moments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you folks. And the PowerPoint that I'm going to use tonight will have a fair amount of information in it. At the end of the PowerPoint are some resources for folks who want to read more in this area, want to do a little bit more digging in terms of some of the research. And I'll work out with Lois how to make sure that this PowerPoint's available to everybody. We can send it out to the folks that registered via your email so that you don't have to be taking notes or screenshots or whatever. We can make sure the PowerPoint is sent out to everybody. So as Lois mentioned, our topic tonight is anxiety and trauma. And I don't think that we are using these terms lightly or easily, meaning that I don't think we're just tossing around the concept of trauma as to what kids, adolescents, and I think all of us have been through over the last 16 months. I think that if you look at the definition of trauma, which is an emotional response to an unexpected or terrible event that leads to unpredictable emotions, physical symptoms, and strained relationships, I think if you're honest with yourself, if I'm honest with myself, I think we've all experienced trauma over the last many months. And so what I'm going to try to talk about tonight are some of the research findings that we know as it relates to anxiety and as it relates to wellness and how to help kids to balance themselves. I'm going to be talking specifically about things that we as the adults in our kids' lives can do to help our children to be able to cope more effectively. But I'm also going to focus on things that each of us need to do for ourselves. And so you're going to notice that as I get into some of the strategies, I'm really going to focus on things that we need to do ourselves so that we are adapting better and we're modeling adaptation for our kids so that our kids can then pick that up from us and do better. The research shows over and over again, it does not matter what we say to our children in terms of do this or do that. What they notice is what you and I are doing. And if we are modeling wellness, if we're modeling taking care of ourselves, they're going to pick that up and they're going to be able to cope much more effectively with what they're going through today and what they're going to be going through as we move into the next stage of a summer, a second summer where COVID is in the background. So I want to start off with a few quotes. My stress stresses me out to the point where I'm too stressed to deal with stress. This was an Instagram post that a client of mine shared with me that I thought pretty much captured where we've probably all been at different points over the last year. And I thought it was a humorous but really accurate way of describing all of the stress that we've had to carry with us on a continual basis. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. William James, one of the early philosophers, one of the early founders of the field of psychology, presented a theory of how we best deal with strong emotions, stress, and trauma. And it's by being able to learn ways to choose our thoughts and to be able to focus on certain thoughts as opposed to other thoughts. And then anxiety is the handmaiden of creativity. I always like to put this into any discussion that I have relating to anxiety and stress, because what we all need to realize is that we always approach the idea of anxiety and stress as if it's a bad thing, as if it's something we want to get rid of. And of course, nobody wants to be walking around on a day-to-day basis feeling stressed out and overwhelmed. But what we're able to notice is that if we learn to look into the stressful feelings that we're having, if we learn ways of being able to use the stress and anxiety to be able to delve more deeply into what we're thinking and feeling, the creativity that can come out of that, the resilience that can come out of that is amazing. And so I'm here to share the concept that anxiety is not all good or all bad. It's how we use it and how we learn to balance it that is really what is going to dictate whether it has a negative effect, a deleting effect, a depleting effect on us, or whether it has an effect of helping us to learn more about ourselves. So here's what we're going to go through is we're going to talk quickly about what is stress, anxiety, and trauma. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the statistics, not just from the pandemic, but also what predates the COVID pandemic is what has been termed in the field of psychology an anxiety pandemic. There have been multitudes of studies showing that the rates of anxiety in children and teenagers and young adults has been going up exponentially over the last 10 to 15 years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those statistics, as well as why this seems to be happening now. We're going to be talking about some of the theories behind the anxiety, because it's those theories that are going to dictate how we can best deal with this. And we'll talk a little bit about what we can do to balance our brain and support adaptability, most specifically through taking care of ourselves and modeling that for our children. And then I'll end up with some different tips that you can put into place to really help your children, some resources, and then we'll wrap up with some conclusions. So hopefully that's what you tuned in for tonight. We've got obviously a lot of different pieces to cover, but Lois is going to jump in. If you've got a question, please put it into the chat box and Lois can cut in at any point, okay? So here we go. Let's talk a little bit about what anxiety, stress, and trauma are all about. So when we think of anxiety, the most effective way to really understand it is to recognize that stress and anxiety exist on a continuum. There is no moment in your life or your child's life where you're not experiencing some level of stress. And what I mean by that is you're experiencing, as long as you're awake, you're experiencing some level of psychological and neurological energy that is causing your various different systems in your brain and your body to react and to release adrenaline and cortisol, which are the stress hormones that allow you to adapt effectively with the different challenges that come to your life. And so when you look at one end of the continuum of stress, you have what we call eustress, which is positive stress, which is the stress that we all need to be able to face minor to moderate challenges in our life. It's the stress that we need to release the proper amount of different stress hormones so that we're able to get up in the morning and go about our day and do some sort of performance situation, or be able to make our meals and to be able to do all of the different daily events. You need your body to be releasing some level of cortisol and stress. And as long as it's in the mild to moderate range, it's what we call eustress, which is positive levels of stress that help our performance to be improved. As you move down that continuum, you move into what's called distress. And distress is when the stress hormones have built up and are existing in your system for too long of a period of time, and they're not breaking down, and they're not allowing you to achieve equilibrium and balance. And when your body has too much stress hormone for too long a period of time, it starts to cause you to feel tired, irritable, more easily frustrated. You don't think as easily and clearly. And that's where it starts moving into this range of distress. And then if you continue moving down that continuum and you can't get away from the stress, and it's building and building and building, or biologically your nervous system is shifted into a level of imbalance in terms of being able to adapt to the challenges, you move into the anxiety end of the curve. And that's the body's alarm system that something is not balanced. Something is off in terms of the different demands that you have, in terms of not being able to turn your brain off, in terms of not getting enough sleep or enough exercise or proper nutrition. And when it exists for too long of a period of time, or if your nervous system and your emotional system is just releasing too much stress on a continual basis, you start to develop an anxiety reaction. And as I said, it's not all good, it's not all bad. It's your alarm system that is built into human beings to say to you, wake up, you're doing something that's not balanced. You need to rebalance your life a little bit. Trauma comes into the picture when something is totally unexpected, something you weren't prepared for, something that goes on for too long a period of time, something that comes out of the blue. Trauma happens when something happens that causes your nervous system to have to react in an extreme way and causes your system to feel a sense of overwhelm, which tends to either lead you into a place of just shutting down, where you block out your feelings and are almost numb for a period of time, or you go into this cycle of feeling overwhelmed. Small things overwhelm you. You break into tears. You can't sleep. You have no appetite. All that happens when the trauma has come into your life and you can't do anything to get away from it, or you feel like you can't get away from it and you're not able to balance things. And as I said, it's that unpredictability, and it's that inability to move beyond it, because your brain just kind of keeps bringing it up as this reminder of something awful that's happened to you. And that's what very often triggers off a lot of physical symptoms. You start to feel sick more easily, your stomach aches increase, your headaches increase, your stress feelings increase. You very often have flashbacks or just repetitive dreams or things like that that cause you to feel this more consistent level of trauma. And a way of looking at this visually.
Dr. Bogart,
Yep.
I have somebody said, would you please ask Chris for advice in modeling when parents are unable to model best or even any self-care, perhaps due to their own poor habits, or else perhaps their belief that a child comes first. Should we save that for later or talk now about it?
So let me go through a little bit more, because we're going to really get into some of those discussions around self-care. And if I'm hearing the question right, I think what this person's saying is, when I, as the adult in my child's life, am constantly overwhelmed and I can't put my own stress or trauma to the side, how can I possibly model that for the children in my life? What I would say in that situation, we'll go into this in more detail in a little bit, but what I would say in that situation is that that's where you need to know when to turn to other people for support. That's where the concept of it takes a village is absolutely critical, because the reality is that I think each of us, again, if we're being honest, has probably experienced that feeling over the last 16 months at some point, of our own level of stress is so much that how could we possibly model calm for our kids? That's where I think the idea of whether it's reaching out to family members, reaching out to a clinician for support, reaching out to teachers, reaching out to an organization like Smart Kids, that's where I think being able to say, I am in this feeling of overwhelm. I don't want to make my child feel more overwhelmed because they'll get fearful if I can't control what I'm going through. I need to reach out to other people to help them model the calm that I'm not able to, so that I can catch my breath. I can bring myself back down to some balance, and then I can do what I know is going to be healthy for myself and then my kids as well. So that's a little bit of a precursor, but we're going to go into a lot more detail on some of those strategies in a little bit, okay? So what I wanted to put out there is this is a curve that represents what I was just talking about in terms of that continuum of stress. And this has been researched extensively by the field of psychology, the field of neuropsychology, and the field of biology, to really look at what happens within the brain when a person is experiencing small amounts of stress, moderate amounts of stress, a little stress that you can't get away from, and then too much stress or unpredicted stress. And the optimal place where you want to exist in the ideal world is you want to try to exist in this range, with periods of time where you kind of dip back into this area for absolute needed inactivity, relaxation, moments where you're not programmed and needing to do anything. But when you're in a typical day-to-day situation, whether you have to perform at work or you've got to perform with your kids, or any situation where you're wanting your brain to be functioning at an optimal level, you want to have enough stress in your life that your body and brain is reacting by releasing a little bit of cortisol, a little bit of adrenaline, but you want to then be able to back away from it and relax, and then back into this zone, and then back into this zone. And it's this balance that you want to try to achieve, where you're not consistently dipping too far into this area. And then the danger is, if day after day you're having a hard time rebalancing, de-stressing, relieving some of the different build-up frustrations, that's where you run the risk of moving into what we call the red zone, or this burnout zone, or this anxiety, panic, anger piece. This is the place that trauma very often pushes us very quickly by releasing too much of the stress hormone too quickly. And that's where, if you don't find a way to back away from that and rebalance yourself to get back here, you can get stuck in that loop of trauma. And that's what we've seen with many of our kids over the last several months, where they've just felt like this pandemic's never going to end, and I can't spend time with my friends, and I can't get away from my family, and school is putting all this pressure on me. They've been existing very often in this place where their typical outlets have been taken away from them, and they're having a hard time getting back to this part of the curve. So just a few statistics, and this goes back, as I said, prior to the pandemic, and then a little bit about the current pandemic. But there are multitudes of studies that have shown that over the last decade, the amount of anxiety that has been pervading kids' lives has increased consistently. When the pandemic hit last March, an interesting thing happened, where from about March through about July, stress levels in kids and teenagers actually went down for a period of time. And the theory behind why it actually went down and kids actually functioned fairly well in the early parts of the pandemic were because schools backed away in terms of very often they didn't have tests. They decided we're not doing grades. There was not as much pressure in terms of their day-to-day activities. They weren't running out from soccer to baseball to dance practice to their tutor to all these different things. And so many of us had a chance to kind of catch our breath. We didn't have constant performance situations. And in the earlier parts of the pandemic, we actually saw a dip in the anxiety epidemic that then as we reached towards the end of the summer, back into school, things jumped up to where the previous rates were. And here's what the previous rates were. The Centers for Disease Control did a comprehensive study of 10,000 teenagers, 13 to 18 years old across the country from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all different types of communities, where they did comprehensive interviews and got a lot of research about different feelings and activities and reactions to different situations. And about 1 in 3 of those 10,000 kids that they interviewed met criteria for an anxiety disorder. That was about 300 times the percentage that we thought was the typical percentage of kids that were dealing with anxiety. Our rates from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, were roughly in the 7 to 10% range and varied a little bit according to different communities, different pressures the kids felt. In the last 10 years, this has jumped up significantly, and those percentages have been replicated in various different studies across the country. One that's most relevant is right in our area. Dr. Sunia Luther is one of the people who has researched this extensively in affluent communities, and her prior research was in disadvantaged communities, but she decided to replicate her studies in affluent communities, and she interviewed all of the Wilton High School students through a rating scale format. And what she found is about 30% of Wilton High School students reported above average levels of anxiety and depression. That same percentage has been replicated in Westchester County. It's been replicated in New York City. It's been replicated in a multitude of other communities. Over the last, so this study by the University of New Hampshire goes back many years, but it's a longitudinal study that has continued on that has shown that when a child is in a situation where they're experiencing significant stress and anxiety that has not been effectively treated, their risk for adult depression is significantly much greater. And so what we've been able to zero in on is that there seems to be a brain reaction that if the brain is under the impact of stress hormones for too long of a period of time, what ends up happening is that seems to be actually causing biological changes in the way that the brain processes stimuli, and it's actually causing a precursor or a predisposition for depression. So it really puts into our world the need that we have for giving kids the strategies to be able to deal more effectively with stress so that we're not setting them up for the risk of depression. And then a final statistic, this study was done towards the end of 2020 to see, are the rates of anxiety holding consistent or actually ticking up a little bit? And what this study showed is it's actually ticked up a little bit from where it was back before the pandemic. And this kind of reflects what we have seen with so many kids, is that when they haven't been able to resume a lot of their different typical daily activities, have their typical outlets with their peers, have more opportunities to get away from some of the stress that might exist within their family. The school demands are increasing, the demands in terms of making sure that their college resume is tip top and all that sort of stuff. All of these things have crept back in without some of the same outlets. And so what we're seeing is those percentages, unfortunately, are right back where they were before. Okay. So what's going on? Lois, any questions coming in?
Not yet, no. There haven't been any questions right now.
I decided to take a break and sip of water, and I decided to pass it off to you.
No, sorry, I couldn't get to that mute button quick enough.
So let's talk about some of the theories of what's going on. And some of these theories, again, they predate the pandemic. There are obvious factors in the pandemic that have increased this: the loss of connection to the peers, inconsistent schooling, hybrid models, in-person models, remote models, a lot of the societal stress that's been paralleling the pandemic. So a lot of the, some of the unrest in, both our political world, our economic world, our diversity, equity, and inclusion world, some of the issues around equity and some of the concerns around policing. I mean, today is the anniversary of the George Floyd murder from a year ago. And so we've been existing in a society that has been stressed out. If you add to that this very inconsistent schooling year, if you add to that, 1 week football's on, 1 week it's off, 1 week this is on, this is off, something like that. So all of these are obvious factors, but that doesn't explain why stress and anxiety has been increasing for the last 10 to 20 years. And so here's the theories that are out there as the most prominent theories. One of the prominent theories is that over the last 20 years, our world and the lives of our teenagers has gone through an explosion in terms of technology. And so, whereas, we existed in a world where maybe there was email creeping in, now there's email and texting and instant messaging and Instagram and Facebook and this and that and the other thing. And there's this constant barrage of stimuli that we can't get away from. Our kids are having such difficulty turning it off. And I think part of the reason they have a difficulty turning it off is because I don't think we, as the adults in the world, have been very good models in turning it off ourselves. And so if you look at the brain is organized in a way, it's got thousands of years of evolution behind it in terms of how many stimuli the brain can process in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If in the course of 10 to 20 years, you're asking the brain to process 1,000 times more stimuli per day than it had to process years ago, we are putting onto our plates way more stimuli than we can possibly process in an effective way. And when those stimuli also are happening to come with an emotional twitch to them, and what I mean by that, our kids are posting Instagram posts and they're getting likes or they're getting thumbs down, and they're seeing their friends posting things, and they're seeing what the model is of the perfect face and the perfect body, and they're seeing their friends that are carrying on these group chats and they're being ignored, and blah 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 blah, all this sort of stuff that's been put on their plate. The brain hasn't had a chance to evolve to be able to manage all of that stimuli, to be able to put it into perspective. Kids, by definition, have difficulty prioritizing and putting perspective on things. And so some of these technological changes have put a demand on our children that are way beyond what their brain is able to manage. There's also a hypothesis out there relating to what we call the psychological immune system, connected to the hygiene hypothesis. And what that refers to is that as kids are growing up, their emotional centers of their brain are learning how to deal with stress and to create grit and to develop resilience based on having to get through stressors earlier in their life. And so if when the child's 6 years of age, they get negative feedback from a teacher, and then they up their performance and do better the next time, and then the next time they get negative feedback, they up their performance, they do better. It's that grit that they form that causes them to have great resilience and adaptability. But if we live in a world where, unfortunately, we as the adults in our children's lives are way too quick to rush in and to put our kids in this metaphorical bubble and to protect them from all the bumps in the road and to go in and argue with their teachers about the grade that they're getting. And if we're putting them in a situation where they're not having as many opportunities to have to face the demands and struggles on their own, what ends up happening is the psychological immune system doesn't develop as much power to be able to fight some of the later challenges. And so one of the theories that's out there is that, unfortunately, some of our teenagers haven't had some of those earlier experiences to deal with this, and that might be triggering some of the stress that they're under. And the saying that goes behind that is smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. There's also the biological model, which is simply that human beings as a species, we are wired for different types of emotional reactions that some of the other species are not wired for. And so there are biological factors that are creating stress as well. And again, when our environment is putting us into situations where there's too much stress coming at us that we're not able to control, that is putting a taxing impact on our biology to be able to deal with things. And a final model I wanted to put on your radar is what is one of the ones that I've studied a great deal in my own career, is the developmental model. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this, but what I am going to show you is what we consider to be the different stages of typical psychosocial development. If you remember back to your intro psychology class, if you studied a guy named Erik Erikson, you were introduced to this theory that to be able to effectively move from one stage to another stage, you have to navigate your way through different challenges. And it's through how effectively you navigate these different challenges that allows you to move into the next stage of life in either a more adaptive fashion or in a fashion where you have lingering residual challenges from the previous stage. And so what I'm going to put on your radar are just these two stages: the school age stage, which represents our kids from about 8 to 12 or 13 years of age. Their challenge in those years is learning that hard work, or what Erik Erikson termed industry, hard work is what leads you to feel this sense of accomplishment. And if you learn that hard work has its payoff, you are able to successfully navigate this stage. But if you just keep working and you keep working and you never get to the point of feeling that sense of satisfaction, what that can tend to breed into you is this feeling of inferiority, this feeling of, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm still not good enough. This is actually a piece that really underscores the mission behind Smart Kids. Smart Kids is all about giving our kids this sense of their strengths as being the most important pieces who define them, so that they can learn that their industry is what's much more important than whether they get an A or a B on a test or how they do in a specific different challenge that they have. And by successfully navigating this stage and really tuning into the strengths that they have inside them, that's what allows them to navigate this stage. But in the last year and a half with the pandemic, there have been a lot of challenges that kids have not been able to resolve as easily because hard work didn't necessarily end the pandemic. Hard work didn't allow them to cope with Zoom classes better. Hard work didn't necessarily allow them to be able to get back to some of their sports and things like that. And so one of the theories in the developmental model is that some of the typical ways that kids are learning that their hard work and energy pays off has been bumped a little bit. Not that it's been taken away from the chance of achieving success, but that has been part of what's put stress onto kids' plates. And then the second stage is this stage of adolescence, which is all about forming my sense of who am I? And I learn who am I by going out, and one day I might wear my hair in a really weird way and kids might think that's really cool. And so the next day I might try on a different outfit and that might think I'm cool, and I'm going to be able to make my definition of who I am based upon the feedback I'm getting from the other kids around me and from some of the important adults around me. If suddenly you enter into a world that takes away a lot of those external ideas of who am I and what gets a reaction, what doesn't get a reaction, and gets a sense of what I'm good at and what I'm not good at and all those different things, what that can do is it can start to create role confusion. And that's one of the challenges that our adolescents who have had a real disruption in some of their access to different activities and outlets and typical ways of defining themselves. That's been one of the reasons why this stage in time has caused a lot of stress for them and why it has been a traumatic period of time for them. So, yep.
Hi. So this is a comment from somebody. Are there any simple rebuttals to children when they say all adults think social media is the cause of all problems. Can you say the data bears it out, but wondering if you've any better suggestions?
I would say to them that anybody who tries to say that anything is the cause of all our problems is trying to sell you a bridge, or whatever the saying is, or they're trying to make it all too simplistic. I don't think that social media is the cause of all of our problems. I think that, unfortunately, and it's a whole different discussion that I'm happy to come back and talk about on a different night, but I do think that, unfortunately, the folks who are the brilliant minds behind social media have unfortunately put into play different models and algorithms that do put people who are not able to effectively disengage, they do put them at a disadvantage, because these models that they build to keep you constantly tuned in are unfortunately models that lead you to feel more and more and more out of control, and more in this place of kind of not knowing what people are going to react to and what they're not going to react to. So what I would say is, I think that social media in and of itself is not the problem. I think that the problem is needing to, that we in some ways we've lost as easy access to the various different balancers that we have in our life. And I think that anything that starts to take over too much of a role within your life, and too much of a place where you're getting your sense of self from, that's a major risk. And so what I would say to parents, what I would say to the kids I work with, and I do say all the time, is absolutely have social media, but there needs to be big chunks of time where you're turning it off. And if you can prove to me that you're balancing it with exercise, you're balancing it with reading, you're balancing it with sleep, you're balancing it with nutrition, you're balancing it with unscheduled time, you're balancing it with time with your friends that's not social media driven. If you can show me that it's part of a balanced day-to-day life, go at it. Social media can be just fine. And as long as you understand where the risks are, then I'm fine with it. But it's when it starts to take on this pervasive, I can't get away from it mode, that is similar to anything that you're giving that much power over your life to. And so that's what I would say, is it's not all bad. It's how it's being used sometimes puts you into that more dangerous place. So, but this slide actually speaks to that. And it also speaks to why anxiety during a pandemic has in some ways gone into this realm of trauma, is because our human brain is wired in a very specific way, and it's thousands of years of evolution has wired our brain to hate. We hate being in this unknown. We like to feel like we understand what's going on around us. We like to feel like, by and large, I know that when my alarm goes off, the sun is going to come up, and I'm going to be able to go downstairs, and I'm going to be able to have my coffee, because my coffee maker will have turned on at the pre-prescribed time, and I'm going to be able to get my breakfast, and I'm going to be able to get in my car, and my car is going to work. And we like to feel like we have enough in our life that we understand and we know, and that we have control. And when we're in a situation where all of a sudden we're reminded that we actually don't know that much about why things happen in our world, and when we're reminded that we actually don't have control over so many things in our world, those two pieces equal triggered emotional centers. And when the emotional centers get triggered too much, that leads to the release of the cortisol and adrenaline at too high of a level, which causes our brain to get very rigid. We get stuck in patterns. We get stuck in this way of not being able to think logically, and we start feeling overwhelmed. And so all of the interventions we're going to talk about from this point forward are all designed to go at increasing predictability in our life and increasing a focus on what we can control rather than focusing on what you can't control. You can spend 24 hours of your day trying to control all the things you can't control, and you're still not going to control them. So if you can begin thinking about, how do I increase predictability? How do I increase a focus on what I can control and a focus on my present? That's what's going to help you be more in control, and it's going to be a great model for your kids. And so the basic underlying components to adaptability are flexibility in your day-to-day life. If Today, it doesn't work to be able to, go through all the different steps of your schedule, being able to be flexible and shift gears and be able to put things into a different category and focus on something tomorrow that you don't have to focus on today, and being able to approach situations in a flexible way, being able to say, all right, I am overwhelmed and that's okay. Let me ride this wave. Let me let myself go through the distress to get back to eustress. Let me put into place some of the different strategies that build resilience and grit. And let me focus on things I can control, the parts to my day-to-day life that I can control. These three pieces together is what makes the human species the most adaptable to change. And so Darwin, over 100 years ago, it's not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how to be more flexible, more resilient, and to practice self-control. And so first off, it's critical that we as the adults first focus on ourselves. If your cup is empty, you're not going to be able to give anything to your child. Take care of yourself first, honestly. I'm not saying those words lightly. I'm not saying them in just a cliche sort of way. I truly am saying, if you can do nothing to actually influence what is going on with your child right at this moment, and what you can do is you can take a few deep breaths and turn on some music and put on some silly TV and laugh at something. If you can take care of yourself and acknowledge the ups and downs in your own day and take care of all these different steps in yourself, that's going to be the best gift you can give to your child. So step number one in taking care of yourself, acknowledge the bumps in the road. Acknowledge that the last 16 months have been some of the crummiest 16 months that we've all had to face. Put on your own oxygen mask. And what I mean by that is focus on what you can control by staying present. One of the big terms that my field is tossing around a lot is this concept of mindfulness. Psychology is using this term mindfulness as if they came up with this idea. But this goes back about 10,000 years into Eastern philosophy, where the focus on what do I need to do right this moment. All I need to do this moment is I need to take a breath in. I need to focus on my present experience. What do I need to do to get myself from point A to point B? By bringing yourself back to your present, by just focusing on your present experience, what your body is feeling, by focusing on your breath, by taking a moment just to put away the thoughts of tomorrow and next month and the thoughts of a month ago and what you didn't get done yesterday. Staying present is one of the biggest gifts you can give to your brain, because it actually sends a message to the limbic system, which is your emotional center, to calm and to break down the stress hormones so that you are moving yourself back towards that eustress place. Take time to relax and model that relaxation. Take some me time, get regular sleep, exercise, and diet. Pick your time to turn off your cell phone, your email, your iPad, all of your electronics. Pick your time to turn it off. Have a time in your family where all electronics go off. If you can't get your kid to turn things off, you've got to figure out a way to turn off the internet, turn off all access to stuff. Make sure, if your child is one of those kids who sneaks out and finds, the device, to be able to turn it back on at 1 a.m, find a better hiding spot, or make some deal with them that gives them a much greater reinforcement for that turn off time. But more importantly, demonstrate that yourself. If you're telling your child they've got to turn things off, you've got to turn it off yourself as well. Socialize safely. If you're vaccinated, we've been given a thumbs up to be able to socialize more outside, be able to take our masks off. Even if your children, they're not vaccinated, doing activities outside, being able to take advantage of this incredible weather we've been having and get them back into as many peer interactions. They need to be around their peers to form their sense of self, their sense of identity, to find different opportunities for outlets and for that feedback about who they are. That's critical for them. And this goes to that question earlier. If you're overwhelmed yourself and you can't do all these other things, turn to other people for help. be a part of the village. And what I mean by that is offer help to others when they need it, but turn to others for help, because it truly does take a village to get through these types of times. And if you model turning to others for help, your kids are going to learn that it's okay for them to express that they need help as well. So here's the 5 principles of coping with trauma. This is based on all of the psychological research around trauma. What we need to be able to emphasize for our kids is that by and large, they are safe. Their day-to-day life is safe. They're going to have food to eat. They're going to have a bed to sleep in. They're going to be able to have a safe environment, that you are trustworthy, that the people in their life are trustworthy, that we're going to be transparent about what we can handle and what we can't handle, and enhancing peer support and peer connections, collaborating with our community, and by empowering them through being able to give them choices in their day-to-day life. You know, do you want to do this activity? Do you want to do this activity? Or do you just want a day off totally where you're doing nothing? Do you want this meal for dinner, or do you want this meal for dinner? Putting in choices and feeling that they can control their world and their small bits of power of where they can exercise that power. These 5 principles, if you are focusing on building safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration with the larger community, and giving them choice, that is what moves all of us from trauma back towards being able to cope effectively. And so let's zero in on some final pieces to support emotional adaptability. I'm going to give you 10 different strategies or 10 different activities that you can push with your children. And the idea behind these 10 is this is what the research says are the most consistent things, but nobody is going to be able to support all 10 of these with their kids. And so what you need to focus on is just 1 or 2 of them on a day-to-day basis, and that's going to be modeling and supporting your kids' adaptability. The importance of play. And the definition that you need to be thinking about when you're talking about play is time without purpose. We need to build into our kids' lives time that is not structured, time that has open-ended nature to it, that doesn't have necessarily a part to it where they've got to accomplish something, where they've got to be the best at lacrosse or the best at dance or the best at making a public presentation. It's just time that has openness to it, that's free time where they can just hang out, they can build something, they can read something, they can zone out, they can watch something funny, they can play a board game, just something that builds into their typical day-to-day time without purpose. That has been shown to be one of the most effective media for being able to rebuild the person's adaptability and to be able to discharge stress. Day-to-day routines and predictability help our kids feel in control. So wake-up routines, meal routines, bedtime routines, times where you can be watching funny TV, times where iPads are off, those routines and the predictability equals control. Don't try to deny kids' experience. If your child comes home from school and is expressing a lot of distress, or if they're talking about all the things they've missed out on the last year, or if they're talking about something that you might think is only a temporary worry in your child's life, validate those losses. Start with the idea of, you're right, this has been a really crummy period of time, or you're right, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can remember when I felt that way. Lead with empathy. That actually goes to a New York Times article that came out a couple weeks ago, which I would have you to, if you Google New York Times, May the 4th, Teenagers and Mental Health. It's a great article on exactly what we're talking about. And it interviewed a bunch of teenagers about what do you need from the adults around you? And what they consistently said is that I need them to not tell me that, oh, everything's fine. I need them to not tell me that I didn't lose out on something. I need them to lead with, yes, you're right, this has been hard. and it still is hard, and it's still going to be hard. Don't feel like you've got to pretend everything's okay. Lead with empathy. That tends to help balance out and allow the person to start to feel like their experience has meaning, and then they're able to work their way through it. Setting up clear rules and expectations. One of the things in the earlier part of the pandemic that I got constant questions on is, should we just basically do away with bedtimes, or should we let kids use their iPads or video, their access to their cell phones 24/7 because, they've had so much else taken away from them. And what I said is you can loosen up on the rules, but don't ever do away with them. Kids thrive on rules and expectations. It gives them, again, that sense of control. Humor is essential. You need to make sure that you're laughing and make sure that they're laughing multiple times every day. Laughter has been shown in the research to directly reduce stress hormones, to bring down your blood pressure. It is one of the best ways to just allow you to feel like there's a way through some of what we're going through. And that proverb has been around for thousands of years. So humor is something that we have seen throughout civilization as being one of the best ways to deal with stress. Staying present. If your kid is panicked about football practice that's going to start in August, try to bring them back to the present. What do you need to do today to make yourself feel better? What can we do today that's a fun thing? Let's just focus on taking 10 minutes where we're not doing anything. Focus on the present, encourage mindfulness. Expect your kids to have more dysregulation. Don't think that it's a problem necessarily. Expect them to regress a little bit. If you've got a 15-year-old who's acting like a 13-year-old, just take a deep breath and know that they're going to probably balance back into being a 15-year-old again. Expect some of this dysregulation. And if you don't pathologize it and you allow them to work their way through it and you give them a chance to find that space and to get themselves balanced, and you connect with them and say, I understand this is really hard. And you connect before you correct, before you punish them. And if when they are dysregulated, if you slow down your own talking and you talk in a softer voice, you're doing what's called co-regulation, which is the best way to help your child to regulate. If your child's bouncing off the ceiling and you start talking lower and slower, that's going to help them to regulate. There are neurons in their brain called the mirror neurons, and those mirror neurons are pre-programmed to be able to model and to regulate based on the people around you. And so if you're getting stressed out, anxiety is infectious. If you're getting stressed out, your kid's going to model to that and get stressed out. If you're working on your own regulation, your kid's going to be able to regulate in comparison to that because their brain can't help but do that. It's those mirror neurons. The importance of sleep goes without saying. Research shows over and over again that it's the best way for the brain to heal, helping them to put stressors in perspective. After you've empathized, then help them to move to that next stage of logic. Let's put this into perspective. What can you do about it tomorrow? What are 3 things you might be able to do to be able to approach this situation differently? What do you think you're going to feel like 3 days from now? Let's just try to go 3 days from now. What do you think that things are going to feel like at that point? That can help them to be able to balance out and promote an awareness of feelings. A guy I want to put on your radar, if he's not on your radar, is a guy named Mark Brackett. He's done a lot of research into the power of just identifying feelings as being one of the best ways for kids to learn how to tame it. And that goes a long way to reducing stress, anxiety. By identifying feelings, that helps trauma to heal. One of the core facets to dealing with trauma is being able to identify what you're feeling. And he came up with this little phrase of name it to tame it. If you start talking in feelings language in a way that your kids can understand what they're feeling a little bit, you get them to be better at being able to identify what they're feeling, you're going to find different ways of them helping to regulate based on that. So I would turn your energies, do a little bit of reading in terms of this ruler program, because it gives a lot of great suggestions of how to help kids to calm when they're in a distressed state. So These are the different red flag warning signs: appetite or sleep problems over many nights, many or over a couple of weeks, physical complaints on a consistent basis. All of these are based on these symptoms going on for a long period of time, not something that happens one day or 2 days, but if it's going on 10 days, 14 days, that's when you start being able to say there might be a bigger problem. Might need to turn to somebody for help. Anytime you move into these areas of threats to harm yourself or other people, body image distortion, where the person is clearly distorted in terms of the way that they're seeing themselves and totally change their eating habits, running away, strange thoughts. These last 4 are more immediate reasons to get support. These top 5 are ones to keep an eye on. And if they go on for 10 days, 2 weeks, that's when I would suggest getting some support. These are some great resources. As I said, we'll send this out to everybody. There's this website that has some really great strategies for families in terms of helping kids gain wellness through stress management. These are some great apps, 3 different apps that are mindfulness, calming, breathing, muscle tensing, relaxing, different apps that are great for kids. These are some great books for you guys to possibly tap into. Ways to build resilience, ways to build an acknowledgement of feelings. And so to conclude this, and then we'll take any questions, change is going to be there. There's no way to avoid it. It does lead to stress. That's how our brain is wired. Stress is inevitable, but it's not a bad thing. It's all about how we cope with it, building different strategies and staying present and focusing on what you can control is what builds resilience and adaptability and flexibility. If you yourself model calm, that's going to go a huge way to helping your kids model calm or take over and feel calm. And your own self-care and self-compassion are absolute keys. Okay, that's where I spend my days. If you need some help, feel free to reach out. And we can turn to some questions if folks have them.
Well, Chris, first I want to say that I found it very interesting, very educational, and I realized that many of the tools can be used on ourselves. As adults, we should be using these tools.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anybody else with questions? Well, Chris did say that, I'm going to put myself on so we're not talking to her. Chris did say that we can access the PowerPoint that he has. And what I am doing is I am putting the email address info@smartkidswithld.org on here. If you have any further questions or suggestions or comments, or if you would like the PowerPoint, if you could please email out. Someone did request if we would be able to send the recording out. We will put your request into the info@smartkids, and we will make that decision at a later time with Chris if he will let the recording be shown again or not. Anybody else have questions? Oh, wait, hold on. Can you talk more about when to seek help? Because many teens turn to language of self-harm and hopelessness, which is in many popular medias and song, but I don't know what that is. Safety, well, something to blow off steam, express fear, and not have an overreaction. Might be trying to. I'm just going to tune myself out here so you could talk.
So, and that's a great question, and it is sometimes hard to weed out what truly is a cry for help or a feeling of hopelessness versus what is just somebody kind of saying, oh, I wish I were dead, or oh, I can't stand my life, or whatever. I mean, there obviously are major differences in the way that we react to that. The one thing I will say that is the absolute best way that you can deal with this, and believe it or not, this is something that they don't emphasize enough in graduate school training programs. It's something that we often have to train our clinicians, is don't be bashful about asking your child directly So you said that, is this something I should be worried about? Are you really feeling like you do want to harm yourself, or is it just something that you are blowing steam off? And the reason I say that is because there's a huge amount of research on self-harm and suicidality that says that when a person truly is suicidal, or that they feel like they're not going to be able to exist in a safe realm and not harm themselves, if you ask them directly, 99 and 9/10 of the time out of 100, they're going to say to you, I am really scared. I am not sure that I can keep myself safe. Or they're going to say to you, no, I just said that. I was just, I was listening to some music, or I was just feeling really frustrated. No, I'm not going to hurt myself. No, I'm not going to harm myself. Kids are more often than not, and adults as well, but kids are more often than not pretty honest about this. And I wouldn't ever ignore the comments, but I would, in a calm and clear way, say, hey, I hear you saying this. Is it something that I really should be worried about? Is it something that you might need some help with? Or, are you worried about hurting yourself? Or do you have any thoughts about how you might do that? And if you ask in a clear fashion, not an alarmist, oh my gosh, I'm panicking myself, but if you're able to ask in that sort of a clear way and have a discussion around it, if they truly are feeling at risk for harming themselves, they're going to let you know. And then you do obviously want to reach out to somebody for support.
Sorry about that. Somebody wants to see the last two slides again.
Sure, I can pull that.
And as he does that, I am going to put down our in the chat room as soon as I find it. I'm going to put our
I don't know if it was that slide.
email address again.
So there's that one. Oops.
No, I think it was, and the one before that.
That one there?
I don't know. Is that the correct one? Jay, I don't know who Jay is. Hold on. If you'd like to share it, oh no. That's it.
Okay. But I'll, as I said, I'll make sure, I'll talk to Jane and I'll talk to Lois, and I'll make sure that they've got the most current. I think you guys do have the most current, but I'm happy to share this with whomever. If you want to get a copy of it, we can send it out to the folks who registered for tonight, and have all the information that I presented.
Okay, what I would like to do is put up a poll here. And if you as guests could please give us this evaluation sheet, and this will help us with future presentations. So if you could just answer these questions. There are 3 questions. I'm going to launch the poll, and that would help us with collecting some information for future events. Thank you. I'll be patient. There's a little timer on it. So does anybody have any more questions for Dr. Bogart? It's almost, I'm going to give you another, just give you up to a minute to do it. And remember, if you need to ask any questions, it's our email address is info@smartkidswithld.org. I'm going to end the poll in a minute. 88% voted. That's pretty good. And everybody loves you. Okay, I'm ending it now. Let me just close it down. And Chris, I want to thank you for everything. It doesn't seem.
A question just came in of what is the best way to deal with frustration in elementary age children. What I would say, because I know we got to wrap up in a second, but what I would say to that is that truly goes to the heart of the piece I was talking about in terms of co-regulation. If you Google the concept of co-regulation, and if you look at some of the different parts to that research, what you'll find is that the overwhelming method for being able to help kids who are having significant frustration and having meltdowns and stuff like that is to the extent that you're able to slow your own breath rate down, slow the speed with which you're speaking, talk in a lower tone, that without your child even knowing it is going to be sending signals to their brain that's going to help them to reduce their own level of frustration. There are a zillion other strategies of teaching your child to, to stop and breathe and hold the breath and be able to focus on positive pieces and all these other pieces I could spend a lot of time talking about. But honestly, it's that co-regulation piece that I want to put on your radar the most, because that is critical to helping anyone around you, but definitely elementary school kids is exactly what the research went and looked at the closest, and found that when they trained teachers to co-regulate and parents to co-regulate, that tended to help the kids reduce, had tended to bring down the kids' experience of frustration significantly.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. And we hope to see you at our next virtual presentation. Look out for our messages. And thank you, Chris, for everything.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everybody. Good seeing everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.